He awoke and wanted Mars. The valleys, he thought. So begins the story that was the inspiration for Total Recall. I wanted to start with the opening line of the story because it is a banger of an opening line. He awoke and wanted Mars. Total Recall was based loosely on the short story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale by Philip K. Dick, published in the magazine Fantasy and Science Fiction in 1966. The original story was a scant 20 pages, and a lot of it was left out of the final screenplay for Total Recall. Much of the actual plot in the movie was added in later by various screenwriters. I'm going to start with a short story, then walk through the movie Total Recall, and then talk about how I think that Men in Black 2 may have also used the same short story for its plot. The short story begins with our hero, Douglas Quayle, waking up from a dream about Mars. He yearns to go to Mars, but he is a lowly office worker and can't afford to go. His wife admonishes him for being a dreamer, but he holds on to the dream when he wakes up. Instead of going to work that day, he goes to recall, to have the memory of a trip to Mars implanted in his mind. And not just any trip, but one as a secret agent. As soon as he's placed on a tranquilizer, though, the technicians at Recall see that his memory has already been tampered with. Under sedation, he reveals that he actually had been a secret agent on Mars, and had been given his cover on Earth to avoid detection. The technicians don't want anything to do with this mess, so they bundle him off in a cab and send him home. Back at home, his wife returns from grocery shopping. Quaid tells her he had gone to Recall and asks her if he'd ever been to Mars. She says that this is the last straw, and then she leaves him. As soon as she leaves, agents come out and tell Quayle that he can't live if he now remembers his previous mission. Quayle attempts to escape, but finds out that he has a tracker in his brain which monitors his thoughts and communicates with the agents. Realizing his escape is impossible, he returns to the agents, with the promise that they'll try to erase his memory again and give him a life with more excitement and purpose so that he doesn't go searching for something like Recall in the future. They get a psychiatrist to analyze his subconscious desires, and it reveals a desire to have been the savior of humanity from a race of tiny aliens who had met him as a child. The aliens had decided that Quayle was noble, and had decided not to destroy humanity as long as Quayle still lived. When Recall goes to implant that memory, however, they find that this memory was also real, and had also been mostly erased. They leave Quayle free to leave, as they all now know that he truly is the key to humanity's continued survival. And that's it, that's the end of the story. The problem with adapting this short story is largely that it is a short story, and it's even shorter if you leave out the second part with the tiny aliens. It's really a pretty bare-bones plot to start with. Normal guy finds out he's a secret agent who's had his memory erased after doing a job on Mars. To transform this concept into a movie, a whole lot more plot has to be added in by the screenwriters. Arnold Schwarzenegger read the story and knew it would make a fantastic movie. He optioned the story and teamed up with Dan O'Bannon, and the two began work on the screenplay. Working through the issues with the screenplay took years, however, and while they were working on the plot for Total Recall, the pair of them also wrote the initial screenplay for the movie Alien. The way they tackled Total Recall was to take the story to Mars. The story began with an appeal to Mars, a yearning for the great red planet. So they go to Mars. A spy thriller set on Mars is a terrific premise. The script by Shusett and O'Bannon kicked around Hollywood for a decade. Everyone loved it, but they couldn't seem to make the film. Dino De Laurentiis began filming with Patrick Swayze cast as the lead, but the company went into bankruptcy early in its production and filming had to stop. Arnold Schwarzenegger had wanted to be Douglas Quayle for ages, but kept getting ruled out as being too big and muscular for a character who's supposed to be an office clerk. After the collapse of the De Laurentiis production, Schwarzenegger convinced the production company Carolco to buy up the rights, with Schwarzenegger starring as the lead. He also ensured he had final script approval, and hired the director, Peter Verhoeven, himself, having admired his work on the movie RoboCop. Verhoeven insisted on the final suggestion of the story of using the setup that the entire thing might have just been the virtual reality program loaded at Recall. This brought together all the elements of the story into a cohesive narrative that really made the movie. Total Recall begins with our hero, Douglas Quaid, having a dream where he is hiking across the surface of Mars in a spacesuit, accompanied by a beautiful woman in a spacesuit. When he wakes up, his wife asks if he was having that dream about Mars again. Quaid admits that he did and tells his wife that they should move to Mars. In the film, Quaid is a construction worker, and on his way to work one day, he sees a commercial for Recall, where you can get the memory of a vacation implanted in your brain. Quaid goes to Recall and pays for a Mars vacation, but with the added bit here that he is a secret agent. They load the program Blue Skies on Mars. But something goes wrong when they've tranquilized him, and he starts fighting off the technicians, saying that they've blown his cover. Once Quaid is finally sedated, they load him into a cab and send him home. Quaid comes to in the Robot Johnny cab, not knowing how he got there. Back at his apartment, he's attacked by guys saying that he shouldn't have blabbed at Recall, but Quaid takes them all out and runs up to his apartment. There, his wife attacks him, and he finds out she was also an agent assigned to watch over him in his new assumed life. Quaid escapes, but now has agents following him. Quaid makes his way to a hotel where he receives a phone call from a stranger who had instructions to help Quaid if he ever got in trouble. The stranger leaves Quaid a suitcase with IDs, money, and a device to remove the tracker in his head. The suitcase also holds a video from his previous self, saying that he is a Mars agent who's had his memory wiped, as he contains information that could take down Cohagen, the powerful man in charge on Mars. He is told to go back to Mars and meet up with the Resistance. Quaid goes to Mars, checks into a hotel, and finds a note from his previous self with a clue about how to find the Resistance. He follows the note to a seedy brothel on the bad side of town where he meets Mylena, the beautiful woman who had loved his previous self. She puts him off initially, and when he goes back to his hotel, he is met by a representative from Recall who says that Quaid is still at Recall, but that something went wrong, and that if he takes a red pill, the representative will help him leave the simulation, but that if he stays, he's likely to lose his mind. Quaid doesn't believe the man, who had also brought Quaid's wife with him, and shoots him, not taking the proffered red pill. Other agents burst into Quaid's hotel room, and Quaid fights his way out and goes back to the brothel with Mylena, who had followed Quaid back to the hotel and helped him escape. There he meets with the Resistance leader, and learns that the information he contains is that the recently discovered Martian artifacts will create an atmosphere on Mars once activated. The bad guys show up, having followed Quaid to the Resistance hideout, and kill the Resistance leader, taking Quaid and Mylena prisoner. They try to reprogram Quaid back to his original self, who had actually been a secret double agent working for Cohagen all along. But he fights his way out of the chair, breaks Mylena free, and they head towards the alien artifacts, hoping to start the reaction that will create an atmosphere on Mars. The bad guy and his goons try to stop Quaid, but he fights through them all and activates the artifact, giving Mars an atmosphere and saving the inhabitants from the tyranny of Cohagen. The movie ends with Quaid wondering if it had all just been a dream. As much extra plot as the movie script adds to the original story, I think Philip K. Dick would have approved, especially with the idea that the whole thing might not have been real. Reality being tenuous is a very Philip K. Dick thing to have in a story. It shows up a lot in his other stories. Having a character experience something and not know whether it's actually happening is completely in line with his style. And the film keeps a lot of the original story. It still begins with the dream on Mars, and it keeps his wife, who also becomes an agent and part of the story. Turning her into a character instead of just a nagging wife who fades into a mist was a nice call. The whole scene at Recall is also fairly close to the original. In a lot of cases, these scenes were fleshed out and given a lot more character and detail than there was in the story. The sales pitch from the guy at Recall is a good example. He sells the fantasy, and also sets up the basis for the concept that the whole film is just a program that Quaid purchased at Recall. The experience he purchased is one where he, quote, gets the girl, saves the planet, and kills the bad guys. There's a lot to like about the film. It looks great, and the special effects still look good now, and the film makes great use of miniatures to show the surface of Mars. But what really sticks with you is the pure glory of Schwarzenegger in an action movie that's also a mind-bending sci-fi film. I totally get why everyone initially thought Schwarzenegger was wrong for the role. It's written as a nebbish, Walter Mitty-esque kind of guy. However, changing it into a construction worker actually works just fine. It's actually somewhat more unreasonable that a big lug would be a secret agent than a smaller, nondescript man. And I kind of get why Schwarzenegger wanted to be this guy. I think he felt an affinity for the character. That sense that there's more to him than just the big guy everyone sees. It's worth mentioning that Schwarzenegger was the governor of California for a relatively quiet 7 years. His tenure was marked by a merciful lack of drama. Schwarzenegger is much smarter than he looks, and his political instincts are usually right on. He really is a kind of secret agent who just looks like a construction worker. So for book versus movie, I like the movie better. I acknowledge the story has great ideas, but it's not much of a read. The ending with the tiny aliens also feels a bit pat, a little forced. The screenwriters sweated this screenplay through 30-something rewrites over 14 years until they'd really nailed down the story. I sincerely doubt that Philip K. Dick spent more than a week or two on this story before moving on to his next one. Side notes. I'm pretty sure the Wachowskis owe a lot of the foundational concepts in the Matrix movies to Total Recall. First and foremost, the idea that the reality around you might not be real, might just be a simulation. I also think The Matrix copies a lot of scenes straight from Total Recall. Everything from removing the bug to the red pill. I cover all of this in much greater detail in another episode, because I think it deserves its own dedicated comparison. But if you happen to watch the two movies close together, as I did, the similarities are pretty obvious. While Total Recall used only part of Philip K. Dick's original story, I realized while working on this that there's another movie that seems like it used almost the whole thing, including the tiny aliens. And that movie is Men in Black 2, the sequel to Men in Black. While this isn't the greatest movie, and certainly one that hasn't aged particularly well, the beginning with Tommy Lee Jones working as a postmaster of a small town was charming, the portrait of a man enjoying his retirement. In the film, Agent K is retired from a career as an agent at Men in Black, and his memory of his time as an agent has been erased. Unfortunately, he's the only person who knows about the Light of Zartha, which an evil alien has come to Earth to try to find and steal. Agent J has to go retrieve Agent K and bring him back to have his memory restored. Even when his memory is restored, he still doesn't remember the Light of Zartha, and thinks he must have wiped his own memory to keep it a secret. He did leave a clue behind, however, in a locker at Grand Central Station. Inside the locker is a race of tiny aliens who have been living there and guarding K's watch and his video rental card that he had left behind as a clue. A video at the video store tells the story of the Zarthans, who came to Earth to hide the light before the evil alien could capture it and take over their planet. Watching the video, K remembers what really happened, that he had hidden the light on Earth and wiped his memory to forget that he'd done it. The two of them end up saving the light, who turns out to be a person, and defeating the evil alien who was trying to capture her. But yeah, I think Men in Black 2 uses the whole Philip K. Dick story as its backbone. Here you've got a secret agent who had his memory wiped, not just once, but twice. The first time to save a race of aliens, and the second time to retire to a boring office job. His first memory is recovered in a huge chair, and the second memory comes back later, when he remembers saving the Zarthans. Men in Black 2 even has the tiny aliens, and here they're really tiny aliens that live in a locker. I kind of have to give this screenwriter Robert Gordon credit for figuring out a way to use the entire Philip K. Dick story. Total Recall skipped the tiny aliens, because in that kind of serious action movie there's no place for the little guys. But Men in Black was always part comedy, and was already about secret agents and aliens, so the story actually fit the mold of Men in Black quite well. Where Total Recall focused on the concept of implanted realities, Men in Black just stuck with the memory erasure, since they already had the deneuralizer. Everyone thinks of Philip K. Dick as a serious intellectual writer, and I think that is definitely true sometimes. What's harder to admit, and feels shamefully tacky to say, is that he wasn't always the best writer. The thing is, Philip K. Dick was a little bit crazy and quite often high, and this comes through in his stories. There's a lot of horror in the existence of his characters, worlds torn apart, invaded, or destroyed. His stories can be a hard read and severely depressing, but these same stories can work really well as the foundation for sci-fi movies. Hollywood has come to rely on Philip K. Dick as one of their top idea men, especially after his death. Everyone thinks of Blade Runner, but that only had a glancing similarity to the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. His stuff is used constantly, either in direct adaptation like Total Recall, or more surreptitiously like in Men in Black 2. I mean, just this one short story has a long and exalted list of descendants. Without the story, we can remember it for you wholesale. You wouldn't have Total Recall. And without Total Recall, you wouldn't have The Matrix. Then you even get Men in Black 2 as a bonus. And that's just one story. He wrote 121 short stories and 44 novels, so there is abundant material out there to reference. And even when it's dark, his stuff sticks with you. He was one of those guys who had a direct line to the creative muse. His work could be terrifically depressing, but you remember it after you've read it. Thanks for listening. This is Rose with Rose-Colored Movies.